Alyssa grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where her looks always stole the spotlight. From a young age, she learned that charm could open doors, a lesson her mother reinforced constantly. Despite this, Alyssa dreamed of a career in fashion design, inspired by the glossy magazines that covered her bedroom walls. When she entered university, Alyssa's ambition and confidence made her a natural leader among a group of women who valued status above all else. These friendships, though seemingly tight-knit, were built on competition and self-interest. Among them, Vanessa stood out as both a trusted confidant and a subtle rival. During her junior year, she met Logan at a party. He was everything she thought she wanted: charming, self-assured, irresistible. Their whirlwind romance was intense, but it ended in a humiliating betrayal. When she discovered his affair, played out in full public view, something inside her hardened. She swore never to let herself be that vulnerable again. The summer after Logan, Alyssa met Ethan. Unlike the flashy men she had been drawn to, Ethan had a quiet steadiness about him. He was sincere, patient, and most importantly, willing to prove himself. Encouraged by her friends, she gave him a chance but made it clear she would be in control. By the time they married, Alyssa had shaped their relationship to suit her needs. Ethan, eager to please, bent to her will, whether it was the house they bought, the friends they entertained, or the way their life was structured. He convinced himself that making her happy was enough. Alyssa, on the other hand, viewed control as a necessity. Her insecurities often surfaced as rigid rules and occasional cruelty. Over the years, she began to notice a change. Ethan, once completely devoted to her, was developing new interests, forming friendships outside their marriage. At first, she ignored it, but soon, a deep unease set in. She had spent years ensuring she was in charge. Was she starting to lose her grip? Ethan. Alyssa's sharp voice echoed through the house. What took you so long? Ethan descended the stairs slowly, clutching her purse, his expression tense. As he handed it over, Alyssa's friends exchanged amused glances, their smirks barely concealed. Alyssa, still striking with her piercing green eyes, gave him an exasperated look. She hadn't changed much since college, still slim, still effortlessly youthful. Her friends had also maintained their polished appearances, except for Rachel. Unlike the rest, Rachel was heavier, dressed plainly, her dark hair untouched by bleach. Ethan often wondered why she was part of the group. She didn't fit in. While the others drank freely, Rachel abstained. Perhaps she was their designated driver. That, at least, seemed logical. Honestly, Ethan, Alyssa sighed, rolling her eyes. You should be grateful I'm leaving. It gives me a break from this cave. She gestured dismissively at the spacious house she had insisted on buying 5 years ago. And it gives you time for your little friends. Just don't bring them into my house. Without waiting for a response, she extended her hand. Now, the money. Ethan hesitated but then handed over his wallet. Alyssa took the cash without a second thought, smirking as she stuffed it into her purse. If you're lucky, and I'm not too tired when I get back, maybe you'll get a little something. That is, unless I meet someone better. Her laughter rang out, joined by her friends. All except Rachel. Ethan said nothing as they piled into the sleek new Honda he had bought her just weeks earlier. He watched them drive off, sighed, and went back inside. After tidying up, he loaded his Jeep with tools and auto parts before heading across town to work on a project. Inside the car, the mood shifted. The giggles faded. Rachel, silent until now, spoke. Alyssa, why do you treat Ethan like that? He must love you a lot to put up with this. Don't you love him? Alyssa said nothing, but Vanessa scoffed. Love has nothing to do with it. Marriage is about control. Brooke laughed. Alyssa's just making sure she stays in charge. Rachel, you still don't get it? The wife makes the rules. Alyssa barely heard them. Her mind had wandered back to college. Back to Logan. The smooth-talking bastard who had swept her off her feet, then tossed her aside like she was nothing. She could still remember that night, the candlelit dinner, the moonlit walk, the way he whispered promises against her skin before they made love on the beach. She had believed every word. And then, days later, she saw him with another girl, laughing as if Alyssa had never existed. The humiliation still stung. She had been just another conquest. Even now, memories of Logan blended with her doubts about Ethan. No matter how much he gave, no matter how devoted he was, that lingering fear remained. Would he eventually grow tired of her? Would he do what Logan had done? Back then, after Logan's betrayal, she had locked herself away for days, sobbing. It took weeks before she could return to class. For the rest of that semester, she refused to date. By the time her senior year began, she had sworn off relationships altogether, until Ethan came along. Ethan was different. Kind. Steady. Predictable. He wasn't flashy, wasn't arrogant. He was just safe. Her friends nudged her toward him, telling her he was exactly what she needed. At first, she resisted. She tested him, pushing boundaries, waiting for him to disappoint her. But every time, Ethan proved his dedication. Again and again. Eventually, she agreed to a date, but not without warning him first. He shouldn't expect much. Alyssa's friends were baffled by her guarded approach to Ethan, warning her that he wouldn't wait forever. When he didn't call the next day, she felt an unexpected pull. Breaking her own rules, she reached out, her pulse quickening when he canceled another date just to see her. From that moment, their roles were set. Ethan devoted himself to winning her approval, while Alyssa made sure she was always in control. She rationed affection deliberately, no kiss until the 5th date, no real intimacy until after marriage. Even years later, she dictated every aspect of their relationship. Ethan never voiced his frustration, though the lack of compromise was obvious. Recently, however, Alyssa noticed a shift. His new hobbies and friendships were changing him in ways she hadn't anticipated. Ethan had developed an interest in cars, connecting with people who shared his passion, including Jason and Natalie Caldwell. He admired their relationship, finding in them a warmth that felt foreign in his own marriage. After much pleading, Alyssa agreed to meet them, more curious than she cared to admit about their influence on her husband. Their home was welcoming, their marriage different from anything Alyssa had witnessed. There was no power struggle, just effortless affection. Jason's casual touches, Natalie's easy laughter, it unsettled her. Even in front of guests, Natalie kissed Jason without hesitation, something Alyssa had never done. As the night went on, she watched them closely, confused by their dynamic. Natalie sat on Jason's lap, completely at ease, while their young daughter, Krista, climbed into his prized muscle car. Neither parent scolded her, showing a trust that baffled Alyssa. Then, Natalie made a casual announcement. She was pregnant again. The genuine joy in Jason's eyes struck something deep within Alyssa. Their entire world revolved around their family. The visit lingered in her mind for weeks, forcing her to confront an uncomfortable truth. Her marriage was nothing like theirs. While she hadn't cheated on Ethan, she enjoyed keeping him on edge, reminding him that she had options. Yet watching Jason and Natalie's closeness made her question whether she had been wrong all along. She rubbed her stomach absently, lost in thought. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to the Caldwell garage, eager to help with the project. Natalie greeted him warmly, letting him start without Jason, who was working late. He hesitated but stayed, grateful for their kindness. He longed for the kind of warmth they shared, though Alyssa dismissed them as strange, forbidding him from inviting them over. Their marriage was nothing like hers, and she intended to keep it that way. Still, both she and Ethan felt the growing divide between them, the contrast between their relationship and those around them becoming impossible to ignore. That night, Alyssa and her friends strode into a packed club, exuding confidence as they claimed a table. It was karaoke night, one of her favorite pastimes. She delighted in watching people attempt to charm the crowd, often failing miserably. This club had a live band, making performances even more dramatic. As expected, the first singers were awful, escaping the stage before the crowd could turn on them. As the night progressed, the audience grew harsher, jeering mercilessly. Alyssa sipped her drink, letting the man beside her, one who had been pursuing her for months, touch her absently. Occasionally, she let him kiss her or rest a hand on her chest, just to spite Ethan, though she never took it further. Brooke returned with a man who was clearly disheveled from their recent activities. Her smeared makeup and his smug grin left no doubt. "Oh no," Rachel muttered. "Relax," Alyssa said, rolling her eyes. "Brooke always does this." "Not her," Rachel replied, nodding toward the stage. "Look." Alyssa turned her gaze to the microphone. A tall woman with long, dark hair slimmer than Rachel but with similar features stood under the spotlight. Before she even began, the crowd started booing. "I didn't know Samantha was coming tonight," Rachel murmured, her voice tense. "Who's Samantha?" Alyssa asked. "My sister," Rachel said flatly, her eyes locked on the stage. Samantha started singing, and instantly, the room fell silent. Her voice was powerful, effortless, cutting through the noise and captivating the crowd. By the time she finished, even the harshest hecklers erupted into applause. "Your sister can sing?" Alyssa asked, genuinely surprised. "Yeah," Rachel said with a hint of pride. She tried recording once, but she could never find the right songs. It wasn't really her passion. She did it for her ex. "She's more into cars." Samantha soon joined their table, greeting Rachel with a warm hug. Her presence commanded attention. She glanced around, taking in the scene, Vanessa giggling on a man's lap, Brooke's lipstick-stained companion, Alyssa deflecting the wandering hands of her admirer. Samantha smirked. "Quite the party here," she remarked, her gaze lingering on Alyssa before moving on. When Alyssa got home, Ethan was already asleep, something that rarely happened. He usually waited up for her, whether to make sure she wasn't with someone else or to see if she was in the mood. Tonight, he hadn't bothered. Slipping into bed, Alyssa felt an odd unease. Her mind drifted back to the Caldwell family. For a fleeting moment, she considered stopping her birth control, letting Ethan father a child. The thought unsettled her. She glanced at him, curled up against her pillow, peaceful in his sleep. Ethan. He really must love me. Her chest tightened, and for the first time in years, she felt something dangerously close to guilt. Tears threatened to surface, but she pushed the feeling aside. Vulnerability was a weakness she couldn't afford. "Ethan," she snapped suddenly. "Why didn't you put the dishes away?" His startled eyes flew open, confusion flickering across his face. And just like that, the moment was gone. Alyssa barely acknowledged Ethan's mumbled apology before snapping, "I don't want excuses. I want my kitchen clean." Without hesitation, he got up and did as she demanded. Watching him go, Alyssa admired the strength in his broad shoulders. Truthfully, she had woken him for more than just the dishes. She wanted him awake, drawn to her, needing her. She waited in bed, wearing only her bra and underwear, confident he would return once the chore was done. When Ethan came back, he paused in the doorway, his gaze flicking over her smudged lipstick and flushed skin. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw desire in his eyes, but instead of approaching, he simply shook his head and walked away. Alyssa was stunned. She expected him to come back, to slide into bed beside her, but she woke alone the next morning. He hadn't returned to their room or even said goodbye before leaving for work. Shrugging it off, she focused on her day, tanning, working out, ensuring she stayed desirable. After all, men only stayed when they had something to admire. At his office, Ethan arrived early, emotions boiling under the surface. After years of enduring Alyssa's coldness, last night had finally broken something in him. His mind latched onto the worst scenario, that she had already cheated and was now blatantly rubbing it in his face. Being alone had to be better than this. He picked up the phone and called Logan, an old friend and a divorce lawyer. "I'm shocked it took you this long," Logan said after Ethan explained the situation. "If we handle this right, you can walk away with your dignity intact." "I don't have proof she cheated," Ethan admitted. "Doesn't matter," Logan replied. "Judges don't care about that anymore. What you need to worry about is your assets. If you wait too long, she'll bleed you dry, move her new guy in, and make you look like a fool. Is that what you want?" Ethan clenched his jaw, picturing the scenario too clearly. "I'll walk you through everything," Logan assured him. "You'll thank me later." After the call, Ethan sat at his desk, intending to write a letter to Alyssa, one last attempt to make her understand what she had done. But what started as a letter turned into something else, a poem, raw and honest, filled with years of pain. Yet, as he read it back, something still felt incomplete. He set it aside and forced himself to focus on work instead. That evening, when Ethan arrived home, Alyssa was sprawled on the sofa in a short skirt, her legs deliberately positioned to catch his attention. He barely glanced at her. His mind was clouded with suspicion. Had she spent the afternoon with someone else? The thought gnawed at him, and for the first time, he almost hoped Logan's surveillance would catch her in the act. At least then, he wouldn't have to wonder. Ignoring her completely, he walked past and shut himself in his office. Alyssa had been waiting for his attention all day. She had expected him to see her, to want her, to beg for her. Instead, he had given her a brief, indifferent glance and disappeared. What the hell was wrong with him? Lately, his eyes held something different. Less longing, more sadness. Maybe even resentment. Annoyed, she screamed, "Ethan, when did you get home? Why isn't dinner ready?" No response. Frustration boiling over, she stormed to his locked office door, kicked it hard, then grabbed her purse and left. She needed to vent. At Vanessa's, she expected sympathy, but Vanessa's laughter only irritated her. When Rachel arrived, Alyssa told the story again, hoping for validation. Vanessa waved dismissively. "You need to remind Ethan who's in charge. He's getting too comfortable. Push him until he knows he belongs to you." Rachel sighed. "Vanessa, your marriage failed because you were obsessed with control. Stop forcing your misery onto Alyssa." Vanessa scowled, but Rachel continued. "Your husband left because you flirted with other men to keep him in check. Now he's happily remarried while you sit here bitter. Maybe you should give yourself advice instead." Vanessa sputtered in protest, but Rachel ignored her and turned to Alyssa. Alyssa, marriage isn't a battle. Look at Jason and Natalie. They're equals. That's why they're happy. Alyssa thought of the Caldwell, Natalie's laughter, Jason's warmth, the ease between them. It felt foreign. She had no idea how to create that in her own marriage. Ease up on Ethan, Rachel said, her voice firm but kind. If you don't, you'll lose him. Just like Vanessa lost her husband. Alyssa sat in silence, Rachel's words weighing on her. For the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong all along. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. As Alyssa went to answer it, Ethan finally emerged from his office. Hey, Ethan, Rachel greeted warmly. How's it going? Not great, he admitted. I can't find anyone to paint my car. Rachel studied him, sensing that the issue ran deeper than car paint. She scribbled a number on a notepad and handed it to him. Her name is Samantha. Tell her I sent you. She'll take care of it. Ethan took the paper, glancing at the name. Thanks, he said, voice subdued. Rachel added gently, You're a good guy, Ethan. You don't always have to give in. Stand up for yourself. Alyssa returned, narrowing her eyes at the exchange. We need to go, she said curtly. Vanessa has an emergency. Rachel raised an eyebrow. I'm going home. Screw Vanessa and her drama. She told me to get my fat ass out of her house. I see no reason to go back. Alyssa hesitated but said nothing as Rachel walked out. Later, she arrived at Vanessa's house to find her lying on the couch with a compress on her head, looking miserable. Brooke was there but quickly made her exit, muttering about a date. Where's Rachel? Vanessa groaned. Alyssa smirked. Remember when you told her to leave your house? Vanessa scoffed. That's not what I meant. Brooke rolled her eyes. Her ex's new wife is pregnant, and they named the baby after Vanessa's mom. Now her mom's the godmother and rubbing it in her face. That's why she's upset. Alyssa exhaled slowly. She spent the evening listening to Vanessa's endless rants about her ex, the man who had moved on, built a happy life, and left Vanessa stewing in resentment. The control Vanessa once had over him was gone, and for the first time, Alyssa wondered if she kept going down this path, would she end up just like her? Alyssa sat, feigning interest in Vanessa's complaints, but resentment burned beneath her skin. Ethan had ignored her last night, had rejected her. That was unacceptable. He needed to pay for it. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing security footage from the house. The recordings were full of Alyssa's sharp words and demands, but Rachel's advice rang in his head. Stand up for yourself. Encouraged, he dialed the number Rachel had given him. Samantha answered warmly and invited him to her garage to discuss the car paint. When Ethan arrived, she gave him a tour, pointing out the paint booth and some of her past projects. His eyes landed on a familiar car, Jason's Mustang, painted in a deep, custom purple. That's Jason's, right? Ethan asked. Samantha nodded. Yeah, that one was fun to work on. Think you could do something similar? Maybe with white stripes. Her face lit up. Absolutely. Their conversation flowed easily from cars to music. In the background, faint guitar chords drifted through the shop. Sorry, Samantha said with a smile. Some friends are jamming in the next room. Ethan shrugged. Sounds fun. Samantha hesitated. We try to write our own stuff, but we're not exactly songwriters. Mind if I listen? She grinned. Of course. The evening had an almost surreal ease. Samantha sang a few familiar songs, and the group attempted to create something original, but nothing quite clicked. I don't know, Samantha joked. Maybe we're just a cover band. You just need the right song, Ethan mused. Samantha shrugged. People have been saying that for years. But music's just a hobby. If I didn't do it, someone else would take my spot, and life would go on. You're really good, though, Ethan said sincerely. She hesitated before changing the subject. Hungry? I was about to grab something to eat. Oh, wait, you're married. Not for much longer, Ethan admitted. My lawyer's working on the papers. Samantha paused, considering his words. So you already know? Ethan frowned. Know what? She smiled faintly. I stay neutral. I don't meddle in other people's wars. This isn't a war, Ethan said. A war takes two people fighting. This is more like a rebellion. My act of emancipation. Samantha studied him curiously. Don't take my word for it, Ethan added. Ask your sister about my marriage. She knows it's always been Alyssa's way or no way. The last few days just confirmed what I should have realized years ago. They spent hours talking, sharing past failures and lessons learned. Samantha confided that her ex-husband, despite having a devoted wife, couldn't resist the attention of his fans. Ethan understood the feeling of being overlooked, taken for granted. For the first time in years, he felt a real connection. By the time he returned home near midnight, Alyssa was waiting on the couch in a nearly transparent nightgown, clearly trying to provoke him. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded. "I was checking on my car's paint job," Ethan replied calmly. "I got caught up talking. If it matters, I'm sorry." "You should have been here, waiting for me," she snapped. "How was I supposed to know that?" he asked, his exhaustion slipping into frustration. "You never told me." "You should have known." Ethan exhaled, his patience spent. He walked past her and headed upstairs. Alyssa waited for him to return, but instead, she heard the sound of his dresser drawers opening. She rushed upstairs just in time to see Ethan moving his clothes into the guest room. "Ethan," she called, trying to mask her rising panic. He shut the door, locked it. She pounded on it, yelling, but there was no response. Inside, Ethan sat at the desk, jotting down words as they poured out of him, raw, honest, painful. The next morning at work, he refined his poem, shaping it into something more. The rhythm, the melody, he could hear it in his head. His secretary interrupted him. "Alyssa's on the phone." Ethan barely glanced up. "Take a message." She hesitated. Ethan never ignored Alyssa's calls. Minutes later, Ethan picked up the phone, not to call Alyssa, but to call Samantha. "Hey," he said. "How much will the paint job cost?" "You cover the materials, and I'll do it for free," Samantha offered. "No," Ethan insisted. "I'll pay." Samantha laughed softly. "I just wanted to do something nice for you." They agreed that Natalie would drop off Ethan's car at the garage. Later that evening, Ethan came home, changed quickly, and headed toward the door again. Alyssa blocked his path. "Where do you think you're going?" "I don't need your permission," he said coolly. Her eyes narrowed. "Since when?" Ethan's expression hardened. "For 10 years, I've loved you. I've waited for you to stop punishing me for someone else's mistakes. But maybe it's time I let go." Alyssa stood frozen as he walked out the door. Only when he was gone did she whisper, "I'm ready to listen now." Desperate, she called her friends. Rachel's advice was simple: be honest. Tell him you love him. Tell him you didn't cheat. Vanessa, however, smirked. "You need to remind him who's replaceable. Sleep with someone. Make sure he knows." Rachel scoffed. "If she does that, she'll lose him for good." At the fairground, Ethan met Jason and Natalie for a Mustang event. He admired the camaraderie of the enthusiasts, the shared passion, the genuine warmth. He envied the ease between Jason and Natalie, the way they moved as a unit without effort. Then, unexpectedly, Samantha arrived. "Hey," she called teasingly. "Why couldn't I get my surprise today?" Ethan looked up, smiling slightly. Jason grinned and pulled her into a hug. Samantha laughed. For the first time in a long time, so did Ethan. Samantha laughed as she stepped back, catching Ethan's flustered expression. "Well, that was awkward." Jason grinned sheepishly. "Sorry, force of habit." Ethan watched their easy exchange, struck by Samantha's warmth. She was nothing like what he had left behind. She stayed with them for the rest of the evening, and as night fell, they sat on the grass, watching fireworks. Ethan's eyes drifted to Jason and Natalie, their daughter curled up between them, the picture of contentment. "Jealous?" Samantha asked softly. Ethan exhaled. "A little." "Me too," she admitted. In the following days, they didn't meet. Ethan focused on finishing the song he had been working on, while Samantha poured herself into painting his car, layering each coat meticulously. Meanwhile, things between Ethan and Alyssa unraveled further. They barely spoke. Rachel urged Alyssa to stop listening to Vanessa's toxic advice and talk to Ethan honestly before it was too late. But Alyssa hesitated, caught between her need for control and a gnawing fear that she had already lost him. One evening, Ethan called Samantha. "Shouldn't you finalize your divorce first?" she teased when he hinted at his plans. He chuckled. "Logan has the papers ready. Just need to decide when to serve them." Samantha told him the car was finished. "You still need to add the grill and a few details, but it's ready for its first drive." "Thanks, Samantha. See you tonight." As Ethan prepared to leave, Alyssa entered the room in a barely there dress, one designed to keep him home. "Don't wait up," she said curtly. "I won't." Ethan barely looked at her as he grabbed his keys. "I'm heading out too," she added, hoping he'd react. Instead, he said flatly, "Don't bring anyone here. Use a rubber. Or don't. Doesn't matter. We haven't had sex in ages." Without waiting for her response, he walked out, humming to himself. Alyssa stood frozen. She had put on the dress hoping he'd stop her, ask her to stay. At Samantha's garage, she greeted Ethan with a bright smile, practically dragging him toward the paint booth. "Close your eyes," she ordered playfully. Frustrated by the height difference, he scooped her up, making her laugh. "You nervous?" "A little," he admitted. She finally let him look. Ethan was awestruck. The bright yellow paint gleamed under the lights, accented with flawless white racing stripes. "The stripes are painted, not decals," Samantha explained proudly. "Seamless." Overcome with gratitude, Ethan leaned in and kissed her. Samantha hesitated, but only for a second before giving in, her passion catching even herself off guard. Between kisses, she murmured, "Rachel is going to eliminate me." Her hands brushed against something in Ethan's jacket pocket. Curious, she pulled out a small box. She laughed when she saw what was inside. "You scared me, I thought." "What would you say if it was real?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Samantha smirked. "You'd have to propose to find out." "It's not a ring," Ethan admitted shyly. "It's a song." Her expression softened. "Most guys say that just to get me into bed," she joked. "They never actually follow through." "This isn't about that," Ethan said. "This is for you." Picking up a guitar, he began playing the opening chords. Samantha hummed along as she read the lyrics, her expression shifting from amusement to something deeper. By the time they finished, she sat in stunned silence. "This is incredible," she whispered, "but also terrifying." That night, Samantha arranged a rehearsal to try out Ethan's song. Beforehand, Ethan took her for a ride in his freshly painted convertible, the warm night air adding to the surreal joy of the evening. For the first time in years, he felt free. When he returned home, Alyssa was sprawled on the couch, still in the dress she had worn earlier. Ethan noticed she wasn't wearing underwear. He didn't care. Quietly, he walked upstairs, packed an overnight bag, and left the note he had been writing in his mind for days. Then, standing beside her, he kissed her gently. One last time. As he drove away, tears blurred his vision. Despite everything, a part of him still loved her. But the threats, the manipulation, the control, her latest stunt had broken something inside him. Alyssa stirred hours later, hazy from the alcohol she had consumed. She vaguely remembered Ethan kissing her and thought it was a dream. Too disoriented to think clearly, she fell back asleep. Ethan checked into a motel, but sleep didn't come. His thoughts bounced between the pain of leaving Alyssa and the undeniable connection he felt with Samantha. Her kiss had woken something in him, something real, something alive. By morning, he knew he needed time. He called his secretary to request a few days off, then told Logan to finalize the divorce papers. Fair but firm, Logan assured him. "You'll walk away with what's yours, and she'll have enough to rebuild. It's the cleanest way." Alyssa woke to a pounding headache and a hollow ache she couldn't name. She blamed the booze, but deep down, she knew better. She had spent years pushing Ethan away to protect herself from being hurt. Now, she feared it was too late. Determined to fix things, she decided to invite Ethan to lunch, to finally have an honest conversation. But when she entered their bedroom, her resolve crumbled. His drawers were empty. His favorite suit was gone. His bathroom shelf was cleared. Panic gripped her as the reality of his departure sank in. She replayed the previous night. Ethan had warned her not to bring anyone home. She had fired back just to hurt him, started drinking despite him. And now, it had backfired. He thought she had cheated. The idea was absurd. She had only ever been with 2 men in her entire life. Logan, the manipulative college boyfriend who had shattered her trust. And Ethan, her husband, the man she might have just lost forever. Alyssa sat motionless, her thoughts spiraling. The stories she had fed Ethan about other men had never been real, just weapons to keep him off balance, to maintain control. Now, they had backfired. She clutched Ethan's note, rereading his words. He had kissed her, had cried. Had he really believed she had cheated? Guilt clawed at her. Her phone rang, jolting her from the whirlwind in her head. Rachel's voice boomed on the other end, sharp with frustration. "Rachel, stop yelling," Alyssa groaned. "If you need to talk, come over." When Rachel arrived, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You look awful," she said bluntly. Alyssa rolled her eyes. "Thanks for the confidence boost." Rachel crossed her arms. "You never listened to me, but let me ask you something. Who are you going to find better than Ethan?" Alyssa frowned. "What do you mean?" Rachel sighed. "I've seen this before. You're walking the same path I did. When I was younger, I thought I could do whatever I wanted, and my husband, George, would always forgive me. I was reckless. One night, I got drunk and made a mistake. George tried to deal with it, but it broke something between us." Alyssa stiffened as Rachel's voice wavered. "A friend convinced George to sleep with someone else to even the score," Rachel continued. "So he did. With one of my friends." Alyssa's stomach turned. "But it didn't make things right," Rachel said. voice cracking. George said it wasn't the same because I had given consent. He felt like he had no choice. She swallowed hard. We ended up in an open relationship. I hated it, but I thought it was my punishment. George never wanted it either. He just agreed because he loved me. For 2 years, we tried to live that way. Then, one morning, I woke up to a note. He was gone. Alyssa stared, silent. He came back, Rachel admitted. But it's not the same. We exist together, but the love isn't what it was. And every time he looks at me, I know he sees them. It's only a matter of time before he leaves for good. Rachel took Alyssa's hands, squeezing them. Real control in a marriage comes from giving it up, she said. Ethan loves you. But if you don't stop, you're going to lose him. Look at Vanessa, bitter, sleeping with strangers while her ex has moved on. Or Brooke, cycling through men just to avoid being alone. Is that what you want? Alyssa shook her head. Ethan and I still have a chance. I'm going to his office today to have lunch and talk. Rachel sighed, shaking her head. That's not going to happen. Alyssa's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Rachel exhaled. Remember my sister? The one who sang at the club. Samantha. She's gorgeous, Rachel continued. Naturally charming. And she doesn't even realize the effect she has on men. Right now, she's helping Ethan move on. Alyssa's pulse spiked. What are you talking about? Rachel's voice softened. They're making memories together, Alyssa. She painted his car, he wrote her a song, and they're spending time together. Meanwhile, Ethan feels like you've been punishing him for years. He told Samantha this morning he's leaving you, filing for divorce. Alyssa's vision blurred. He's devastated, Rachel added. Alyssa felt like the ground had vanished beneath her. What should I do? She whispered. Don't let him leave, Rachel said urgently. If he goes, Samantha will likely go with him. Make him to stay. Show him you're ready to change. Alyssa's hands trembled as she unfolded Ethan's note again. The words blurred through her tears. Rachel busied herself making phone calls while preparing a green smoothie. She placed it in front of Alyssa. What is this? Alyssa muttered. Drink it, Rachel said. It'll help the hangover. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat with Samantha, rehearsing her band's version of his song. Watching her sing, seeing the way she felt every note, something inside him settled. Her enthusiasm was genuine. Her laughter was real. And Ethan realized how long it had been since he had been around someone who made him feel wanted. Can we run the chorus again? Samantha asked. I wanted to be perfect. Ethan nodded. He couldn't focus on work. His mind was a storm. For years, he had held on to hope, hoping that one day, Alyssa would love him back. That she'd stop punishing him for someone else's sins. But her cruelty had only worsened, especially after she started listening to Vanessa. The open threats of infidelity, the constant manipulation last night had been the final straw. As Samantha sang, Ethan knew he had made the right choice to walk away. This song wasn't just about starting over. It was the end of his past. Samantha suggested a poetic way to mark the transition, performing the song at the club where they first connected. Meanwhile, Rachel sat in a waiting room, frantically calling Samantha. After multiple missed attempts, Samantha finally answered. Hey, Rachel. Samantha, do you know where Ethan is? Rachel asked, urgency in her tone. Samantha sighed. I could find him if it's important. He's with you, isn't he? Rachel accused. Samantha's voice remained calm. You promised to wait. It's out of my hands, Samantha replied evenly. I told you I'd stay away until their marriage was over. Samantha's voice sharpened over the phone. After what Alyssa did last night, it's over. Ethan deserves better. Rachel's heart pounded. Please tell me nothing has happened yet. Of course not, Samantha snapped. I'm not Alyssa. I don't go to clubs, let strange men grope me, and then tell my partner I'm going to sleep with someone else. Rachel exhaled sharply. Where is he? Alyssa needs to talk to him. Samantha's tone cooled. I doubt he'll want to talk to her. But if she insists... Rachel pushed. Samantha hesitated. Her best chance is at the club tonight. Ethan's performing the song he wrote. Rachel swallowed hard. For you? Samantha didn't answer immediately. We'll be there, she said finally. Then, cryptically, it'll be a special night. Dress for it. Meanwhile, in Dr. Vivian Langley's office, Alyssa sat hunched in her chair, her face streaked with tears. Vivian, known for her ability to mend broken relationships, listened with growing disbelief. Alyssa didn't see herself as the problem. She acknowledged treating Ethan poorly but justified it. Her behavior was self-defense, protection from the pain of her past. Alyssa, Vivian said gently, was Ethan the one who hurt you in college? No, Alyssa murmured, her voice taut. It was Logan. And your behavior now. Part of it is a defense mechanism, isn't it? To prevent that pain from happening again. Alyssa's lips pressed together. I guess so. Vivian's gaze was unwavering. Is it also about revenge? Alyssa inhaled sharply. Maybe. Vivian leaned forward. You allowed strangers to touch you in clubs, while barring Ethan from similar closeness. You insisted Ethan loved you, yet you spent years punishing him for another man's betrayal. Do you really think that's fair? Alyssa sat frozen, unable to answer. You wanted a fairy tale, Vivian continued. And Ethan tried to give it to you. But instead of appreciating him, you made him pay for Logan's sins. Alyssa clenched her jaw. Bad things happen to everyone, Vivian pressed. But maturity means moving on. Ethan gave you love, respect, a life together. Instead of cherishing him, you made him suffer for something he never did. Alyssa's breath was shaky. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what she had done. That evening, Ethan stood backstage at the club, running his fingers over the strings of his guitar. The performance was bittersweet. It held his pain, but also the promise of something new. Samantha stood by his side, exuding warmth and confidence, a stark contrast to the cold turbulence he had endured for years. As he strummed the opening chords, Samantha's voice filled the room, rich and powerful. Ethan exhaled slowly. This was his turning point, the night he would finally begin to let go. Alyssa arrived at the club with Rachel, her stomach twisting in knots. Then, she saw him. Ethan stood on stage, lost in the music, his voice raw with emotion. Alyssa's breath caught. The song was about them, about her. And as she listened to the words, his words, she felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of losing control. Not fear of vulnerability. But fear that it was already too late. Rachel's words from earlier echoed in her mind. If you had met Ethan first, before Logan, would your life have been perfect? Alyssa had clenched her fists. Yes. So you're punishing Ethan not only for Logan's betrayal, but for your own impatience? Alyssa had wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. You let strangers touch you in clubs, Rachel had said. But the man who loved you had to earn every ounce of affection. Do you see how cruel that is? Alyssa had scoffed. Ethan and I still have sex. At least once a month. Vivian's response had been sharp. Alyssa, leave my office. Come back when you're ready to face reality. Frankly, I hope Ethan does leave you. Maybe then, you'll understand. Alyssa had stormed out, seething. But now, watching Ethan and Samantha on stage, a sick realization settled over her. Vivian had been right. Alyssa had spent so much time ensuring Ethan never felt secure, so he would always need her. But Ethan wasn't hers anymore. He belonged to this moment, to this song, to Samantha. And suddenly, Alyssa saw it. What she had refused to see for years. Ethan had always loved her. He had wanted her. But she had never let herself love him the way he deserved. And now, he was moving on. Rachel leaned in, voice urgent. Ethan used to look at you the way Jason looks at Natalie. But if you keep pushing him away, he won't anymore. Alyssa swallowed hard. And my sister? Rachel added. She's already there to catch him. Alyssa shook her head. Samantha wouldn't. She will. Rachel's voice was firm. Samantha isn't a homewrecker. But she won't wait forever. Ethan loves you, but Samantha makes him feel something he hasn't felt in years, appreciated. Alyssa's chest tightened. Rachel's next words were a warning. You have one chance to fix this. One. Alyssa forced herself to look back at the stage. Samantha and Ethan were standing close, too close. Their voices blended effortlessly. Ethan looked alive, vibrant in a way he hadn't been in years. And for the first time, Alyssa realized. She was terrified of losing him. But she was even more terrified that she already had. Alyssa's stomach twisted as Brooke's words lingered in her mind. If you weren't so bitter about your ex, you'd understand. Brooke had said, her voice laced with pity. Vanessa scoffed. I'll always be in control. Brooke just shook her head. Control won't keep you warm at night, Vanessa. It won't tell you it loves you when you feel insecure. You'll grow old, angry, and alone. I'd rather build a life with someone who loves me. Alyssa barely listened. She couldn't think about anything except Ethan. She didn't care about control anymore. All she wanted was him back, his warmth, his love, the life they had once shared before she had ruined it. Please don't let it be too late. Tears streamed down her face as they pulled into the club parking lot. Only to be met with an unexpected problem. The lot was closed, even though there were visible empty spaces, and a massive line stretched nearly a block down the street. What the hell is going on? Vanessa asked, frowning. Rachel sighed. I told you we should have come earlier. Alyssa felt a lump in her throat. Samantha said tonight would be different. Rachel stepped aside to make a call. Minutes later, she returned, her expression unreadable. We're in, she said, leading them to the entrance. She handed her phone to the bouncer, who barely glanced at it before nodding and waving them through. As they stepped inside, the roar of engines filled the air. A convoy of yellow Mustangs pulled into the lot. Alyssa's breath hitched when she saw the lead car, a striking convertible. Ethan's car, the one Samantha had painted for him. Her heart pounded as she spotted Samantha's wild curls flowing in the wind, seated beside her husband. Ethan parked, opened the door for Samantha, and escorted her through a side entrance without even glancing in Alyssa's direction. A lump formed in her throat. Inside, the club was packed beyond capacity. Every table was full, forcing them to scan the room for any available space. Vanessa spotted a man she knew sitting alone. They joined him, but she quickly abandoned them to dance with him, leaving Alyssa unsettled. The man who had flirted with her last week approached, draping an arm around her shoulders. Where were we? He asked with a grin. Alyssa recoiled. Get away from me, she snapped. I don't need my husband seeing this. The man shrugged and disappeared into the crowd. Rachel sighed. It's too late. Alyssa turned to her, confused. Samantha saw him touch you last week, Rachel said, her voice heavy. Ethan probably already knows. Alyssa felt her chest tighten. For years, she had believed she was in control, that she held the power. But now, she understood the truth. Ethan had never been under her control. He had simply loved her enough to follow her lead. And now he had stopped. He was choosing his own path, and she was no longer on it. A new kind of panic took hold of her. She needed to find Ethan. The crowd had gathered thick near the stage, filling the dance floor. Tables had been moved forward, taking up space, creating an intimate performance area. Alyssa tried to move toward it, but was stopped by two bouncers. No entry, one said firmly. She scanned the crowd frantically and locked eyes with Natalie, who waved her over. At Natalie's signal, the bouncer let her through. Alyssa exhaled shakily. Thank you. Where's your husband? It's odd seeing you alone. Natalie smiled. Jason's backstage with Ethan, calming his nerves. Alyssa frowned. Why would Ethan be nervous? He's never performed live before, Natalie explained. And tonight, there are record label reps here. Alyssa's breath caught. Ethan's got a lot riding on this, Natalie added, watching Alyssa's expression carefully. Maybe you still have a chance. You're here. That means you care. That's something. Alyssa nodded, barely able to process her own emotions. Her mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. Ethan wasn't just moving on, he was rising. And she had never supported him like this. Returning to her friends, Alyssa ignored Vanessa's questions about the reserved section. Instead, she turned to Rachel. Ethan's performing tonight. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the host stepped onto the stage to introduce the first act. A greasy-haired man belted out an off-key rendition of Crazy Train. The crowd jeered him off stage before he even finished the first verse. They're brutal tonight, Brooke muttered. Something's different, Rachel agreed. The next hour passed with 8 more performances. 2 singers were genuinely talented and earned applause. The rest received lukewarm reactions or outright scorn. The low point came when a nearly 50-year-old man strutted onto the stage in skin-tight pants, attempting a Rod Stewart song. The crowd barely tolerated him. Another near-disaster followed when a man singing Poison's Ride the Wind responded to boos by flipping off the audience and mooning them. A group of furious patrons chased him into the parking lot. Whether out of rage for his performance, his behavior, or his song choice, no one could tell. Then, everything changed. The stage was cleared. A new group of musicians took over, men who looked sharp, focused, like hunters ready to pounce. The club fell silent. The lights dimmed. Then, a single spotlight illuminated Ethan. Alyssa's heart slammed against her ribs. And then she heard it. The whistles. Women in the audience, leaning forward, eyeing her husband. Alyssa seethed. How dare they whistle at my husband? The bitter thought formed before she could stop it. And then, realization struck. She was no different from them. Ethan was no longer hers. She watched helplessly as he smiled, a boyish, charming grin, and began to strum a soft, infectious tune. The faint thump of a bass drum kept time, steady and controlled. Alyssa smiled, waiting for him to look at her. But he didn't. Her annoyance grew as the whistling intensified. Then, the music shifted. A heavy bass line thundered in. Ethan's melody transformed into a powerful guitar riff. The crowd erupted. And then Samantha joined him on stage. Her wild hair flowed behind her as she smiled, danced, moved with effortless confidence. Alyssa watched, stunned. Ethan didn't just look free. He looked happy. Alyssa felt as if the floor had been pulled out from under her. The electric chemistry between Ethan and Samantha was undeniable. Every note, every lyric, was a dagger to the heart. The song wasn't just music. It was their story. And for the first time, she saw it from his perspective. The lyrics were raw, exposing the frustration, the neglect, the slow death of their marriage. Alyssa had never truly listened to Ethan. And now, the entire club was singing along to the chorus, turning his pain into an anthem. Samantha played up the performance, stopping dramatically to mimic a tantrum, laughing with Ethan in a way that made Alyssa's blood boil. Then came the second verse, about dwindling patience. Samantha smirked and walked off the stage, striding straight toward Alyssa. The crowd parted as she approached, and with theatrical precision, Samantha handed her a folded stack of papers before returning to the stage just in time for the chorus. Alyssa's breath caught. She assumed they were lyrics, some petty taunt. But as she unfolded them, her hands began to tremble. These weren't song lyrics. They were divorce papers. Samantha's voice boomed through the speakers. Alyssa Carter. Alyssa froze. Her name rang in her ears, making her stomach twist into knots. "You've been served," Samantha announced, her voice filled with triumph. The crowd erupted into cheers. Alyssa's vision blurred as reality hit her like a freight train. Ethan hadn't just written her a song. He had turned their end into a spectacle. A performance. People celebrated Samantha, declaring her their new favorite singer. Meanwhile, women Alyssa recognized from the club, the ones always eyeing Ethan, were already heading backstage, no doubt hoping to get their chance with him. Alyssa clutched the papers, paralyzed. Rachel's warning echoed in her mind. "Ethan, she won't start until you have the divorce papers in hand. She's younger, prettier, and ready to settle down and have kids." Alyssa had laughed then, had mocked the idea that anyone could take Ethan from her. "Not with my husband," she had said defiantly. Now, she wasn't laughing. She and Rachel hurried out of the club, leaving Brooke and Vanessa behind. As they reached the parking lot, they saw the convoy of yellow Mustangs driving away. Alyssa knew where they were headed, but she didn't rush. The drive to Jason and Natalie's house was suffocatingly silent. Her mind churned. Ethan had actually done it. He was gone. When they arrived, the house was buzzing with energy. Mustangs lined the street, people laughing, playing games, celebrating. Alyssa felt rage bubble beneath her grief. How could they all be having fun while her marriage was falling apart? Spotting Natalie, she stormed over. "Where's Ethan?" Natalie tilted her head, unsurprised by the question. He and Samantha stayed back at the club. Alyssa's throat went dry. "Why?" Natalie smiled faintly. "The band got a record deal. They're negotiating contracts." Alyssa's stomach dropped. Natalie gestured toward the driveway. "Did you notice Ethan's Mustang isn't here?" Alyssa didn't respond. She was already turning away. Dragging Rachel with her, she jumped back into the car and sped off. Back at the club, the parking lot was nearly empty. Except for one car, Ethan's Mustang, and a couple of limousines. Alyssa knocked on the club door, and the bouncer from earlier smirked at her. "You're persistent," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Inside, the club had quieted. Most of the patrons were gone. And there, seated at a private table, were Ethan and Samantha. They weren't touching, but the closeness between them was unmistakable. Alyssa stormed up to them. "Come on, Ethan," she snapped. "Let's go home. We need to talk." Samantha hummed a few lines from the song under her breath, her voice dripping with irony. Ethan's expression remained calm, but his eyes were resolute. "Alyssa," he said, "you already have the divorce papers." Alyssa's lips parted, but no words came out. "The ones tonight were symbolic," Ethan continued, "but the real ones will arrive tomorrow." He exhaled. "This is the best decision for both of us. I've been your lackey for too long." Alyssa gaped at him. "So you're just running off with your little girlfriend to play rock star and forget about us?" Ethan shook his head. "I have a career I love. Samantha does too." He glanced at Samantha, and Alyssa felt something shatter inside her. "Neither of us wants to be rock stars," he said simply. "But we do want more of each other." Alyssa's chest tightened. Once the divorce is finalized, Ethan added, we're going to try to build something real. Alyssa's hands shook. I suggest, Ethan finished, you get a lawyer. And with that, he took Samantha's hand and walked out, leaving Alyssa alone with her fury. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. At first, Alyssa's lawyer dismissed Ethan's claims of psychological abuse. Infidelity would have been easier to argue, he said. But after their first meeting with Ethan's attorney, his tone changed. They have video evidence of you at clubs, he told her bluntly, behaving in ways no married woman should. Alyssa paled. The footage from your home is worse. She felt her pulse race. Proof of you yelling, swearing, humiliating him. Even your therapist's records don't help you. Alyssa gripped the edge of the table. If this goes to court, her lawyer said, you'll come off poorly. His advice was clear. Settle and move on. Alyssa had no choice. 3 months later, Ethan proposed to Samantha. She accepted. Ethan bought out Alyssa's share of the house, giving her enough to live on. But it didn't last. Alyssa spiraled. Everywhere she went, the radio, stores, TV, she heard the song. The one about her. The band had moved on, replacing Ethan and Samantha with new members. But the original recording, featuring their performance, was everywhere. Its music video was a constant reminder. Ethan's Mustang, Samantha's magnetic presence, and the story of a marriage that had crumbled. Meanwhile, Ethan and Samantha faded from the spotlight, returning to quiet lives. Samantha moved into Alyssa's old house. And Alyssa? She moved in with Vanessa. But that, too, soured quickly. They fought constantly, their shared bitterness poisoning the air. Alyssa blamed Vanessa for ruining her marriage. Blamed her for planting the seeds of manipulation and control that drove Ethan away. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had done it to herself. Years passed. Samantha and Ethan had 3 children. A home filled with love. Alyssa, meanwhile, was alone. Her settlement money dwindled. She gained weight. She worked as a waitress to survive. And sometimes, she rode the bus back to her old neighborhood, to sit on a bench, and watch Ethan and Samantha with their children. The life that had once been hers. And every time she heard that song, she knew she would never escape it.